Okay, welcome back Science 30s to our next lesson in Chapter 4. This is 4.2, and today we're going to be looking at the cell cycle and mitosis. Okay, so today we're going to look at the cell cycle. Now this is a cycle, so we could start anywhere in the cycle, but we're going to start with an individual's cells. So the cells that are in my body or yours, starting with a normal body or what's called somatic cell. And in that cell we have a chromosome like this, and it's paired with another chromosome. When we have these chromosome pairs, it's called diploid. Okay, so it's kind of like di meaning two, meaning that we have two here in a pair. Now, of these pairs of chromosomes, there's not actually just one as we show in that cell there. There's 23 pairs of chromosomes. 23 pairs, sometimes represented as 2n, because we have two, as in like pairs, of 23, and it equals a total of 46. So you can see it written as 2n diploid, or having 46 chromosomes. For the next part of the cycle, we're going to look at how this cell is going to get ready for sexual reproduction, which means it doesn't have to just make copies of itself, it has to make half copies to mix with someone else's half copies to make a offspring. Okay, so this is going to go through the process of meiosis. Okay, we're going to look at that a little bit in the next lesson, where it takes that diploid cell and is going to make half of this DNA in another cell. So we can see it's just got the one chromosome there, it's not in pairs. So this is called haploid. Before it was diploid, meaning two. This one is haploid just with one. So it has 23 chromosomes, but it's not in pairs. So just 23 chromosomes, which is sometimes just written as n, and n is equal to 23. Now, depending on the gender, this would be either a sperm or an egg cell, and these are called gametes. They're sex cells that have half the DNA haploid. So to make an offspring with full DNA, it needs to mix with another haploid cell. Again, one of these would be sperm, one of them would be an egg. And when they combine, they're going to go through this process called fertilization and combine that genetic material to now make 23 pairs of chromosome, and we've now gone back to a diploid cell, and this is what's going to turn into the offspring. Now, once this has occurred, this is very, very small, like one cell big. So it needs to grow and get a lot bigger and make more and more cells. And that process, it doesn't want to make half like we saw with meiosis. We want to make duplicates and more full DNA cells. So this is going to go through a different process called mitosis, where it is going from diploid cells to more diploid cells, basically having cells making copies of themselves. And this process is going on all the time as you grow and need to repair cuts and things like that. This is how we make copies of our cells. And that process of mitosis is what we're going to examine in more detail in this video. So just as a kind of overall, we're going to start with a diploid cell with 23 chromosome pairs, and that's called the parent cell. So that's what we're going to start with. And then it's going to have to duplicate its DNA. So we're going to have to double that DNA, and it's going to start to split and then eventually break it into two daughter cells that now are identical clones to the cell that we had at the start. So this is kind of a cool process, how your cells can clone themselves and make copies, and it's happening all the time in your body. Because this is used for growth and repair of body cells, so it's happening a lot in your body to do that. And it creates two identical daughter cells. These are the same. This one is the same as that one, and they're the same as the parent. We started with diploid over there, and we end up with diploid cells over here, just two of them. Okay, so that's pretty crazy how it can do that. Let's look at a little more detail for how mitosis works. So we're going to start with the cell, and it's got all the DNA kind of in these random strands all over the place. It's not very organized. But we're going to have to double all of that DNA before we start clumping these and going through the mitosis process. So it's going to take that DNA and it's going to make a copy of itself. And we mentioned it before, but let's go over that process for how it's going to copy its DNA. So DNA replication is done like this. We have this double helix of DNA, and we can see all the nitrogen base pairs matching A and T and C and G. So how we're going to duplicate that is first we're going to cut it down the middle. We're going to break up those nitrogen base pairs, and that's done by something called helicase. Okay, so now it's cut. Half of the nitrogen base pairs are going to stay there. We're going to pull the other ones to this side. Okay, now looking at this strand, we only have half of it, but if only one thing can bond to each of these nitrogen base pairs, A can only go to T and C can only go to G, we kind of know what should match up on that side, and your body does as well, and we have a process where we can just match all of these up. So polymerase comes in here, and he's pulling all these nitrogen bases up that match where they're supposed to go, because again, there's only one type of letter, one type of nitrogen base that can match. So we've matched all those sides, finished by putting a sugar and phosphate backbone there, and we have that full set of DNA. Now the same thing can happen over on this side. So here we just have the opposite. We have the T, but we know only A can go there. So polymerase is going to match the A, match the C, the T, and then the G. And now we have that copy. We'll finish it off with a backbone. And now we have two sets of DNA, and that's DNA replication. Okay, so now that it's duplicated, we will start the mitosis process. And the first part is to organize these or condense them into chromosomes like we've been showing in the previous diagrams. Okay, so just to show the initial state of this cell is over there. The initial DNA is I'm going to show with one green and one red. And so you can see here we've duplicated that. We now have two reds and two greens. So it's kind of halves of the X's are called chromatids. So we can see that two chromatids of red and two of green. We've got double the DNA that we had to start. Okay, and that process of just condensing it into these chromosome pairs is called prophase. Okay. For the next phase, we are going to line them up in the middle of the cell. So we can see they've gone to sometimes what's called the equator or the middle of the cell, and that process is called metaphase. Now that they're in the middle, we're going to want to pull this apart into two separate copies of the DNA. So we have these centromeres on the side. They're going to reach out and grab onto the center of those DNA pairs, and it's going to pull them apart to opposite sides of the cell, and that is called anaphase. Okay, so now that we have the DNA on separate sides and we have two copies of this, we're gonna have to break this into two cells, so it starts to form a nuclear membrane around each part, which is called telophase, and finally it's going to split into our two cells. So we started with a parent cell like that. We now have two daughters that are identical to the parent. Now there was some other words there that we should probably write in our notes, so let's put those into the notes here. So first, DNA has to be replicated for step one, split by helicase, and then polymerase is going to add those base pairs. Prophase was the first part of mitosis where DNA condenses into chromosomes. Metaphase was where homologous chromosomes align, so that means ones that have the same traits are lined up. Anaphase is where it's going to be pulled to each side of the cell, and telophase where it's going to start to form the nuclear membrane around each half, and then finally the cell divides. So kind of 6 steps to that cell replication. And those main 4 phases in the middle there, from prophase to telophase, you can kind of remember with the acronym PMAT. It starts with a P and then goes M-A-T. PMAT might help you to remember the order of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And that's all we have for this video. So the next part of the cell cycle with meiosis will be covered in the next one, but hopefully this video helped you to understand mitosis and the general overview of the cell cycle. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.